Huh, I remember the N600 series. So the original N600 was one of my favorite cases under $100.
So we're checking out the N600, sort of a budget $80 mid tower, which follows a similar front panel design as the rest of the N series cases.
Well, look what we have here. Some hardware Canucks dust filters, but that's for another case. And I'm really curious to see what Cooler Master has done with this series. Are they improving on it, or are they just digging themselves in a hole? Now, the good thing about this enclosure is that it's only $69, so it is within that budget territory, competing with the likes of the P350X, for example, and like the H500 from NZXT. So, is this thing any good? Let's find out right after this.
Hello, I'm looking for some fans.
Well, are you married?
Yeah, I have a ring.
What is your favorite number?
I would say 3.
Do I have the perfect fan for you?
This is the new Thermaltake Ring Trio 12 fans with good static pressure for radiators. It is a beautiful frame with double side and center ring illumination with soft and super bright spill with Razer Chroma compatibility. Control it through your smartphone, the RGB Plus software on the PC, or Amazon Alexa.
Well, I'm gonna take these home. Perhaps you should too. Check them out in the description below.
Alright, so what we have here with the NR600 is Cooler Master's attempt to compete with the P350X and the NZXT H500, because physically it kind of reminds me of those two cases. So on the exterior, for example, the whole boxy approach is very reminiscent of the NZXT H500, while the built-in power supply shroud into the actual frame and reducing the tempered glass side panel size is what the P350X is known for. It is a little bit boring, I'm not gonna lie, but if you're going for the whole subdued and simple aesthetic, here you have the NR600, and the only physical differentiations between this case and many others would be the tiny little punched-in Cooler Master shape on the power supply shroud at the back, and of course the ventilated front mesh panel with that glossy section on the right. And so this mesh, I would say, is the star of the show because there's nothing blocking airflow. There's not even a dust filter behind the mesh. That is kind of your built-in dust filter, if you may. It is metal and it will allow majority of the airflow versus what you'll see with many other cases that have some sort of metal mesh and a dust filter, so that's a good thing. As for cooling, we have 2 fans included, one in the front, one in the rear, and for the front installation you can do up to a 360 or a 280mm radiator up here, and the power supply shroud section of the front is cut out enough, usual 3 inches, so you can fit the radiator and a set of fans. And because the fans are installed outside of the frame, because there is no dust filter up there, you could do push and pull, which is pretty nice. Although I will say I'm disappointed at the build quality of the front panel. The frame itself is plastic and only the mesh is metal, so there's plenty of flex going on, as you can see. And as for the top, you can do dual 120s or 140mm fans, and interestingly, the dust filter comes not installed by default. It's actually magnetic and attached to the side panel, so I would recommend installing it to allow for better air pressure to that hole, like from the front to the back. And it's not exactly radiator friendly up there, simply because that entire cooling section is moved all the way to the back, and there isn't that much clearance between the motherboard. The I/O here is pretty basic with dual USB 3s, power reset button, and a combo mic/headphone jack. Both side panels use thumb screws for the mount, and I appreciate the dual step procedure for the tempered glass removal. First you have to pull it out and then angle it and remove the little hinges at the bottom, so you could install the tempered glass panel without using thumb screws. Now as for the interior, for $69 we're not expecting miracles, and I'm kind of glad that there is no sophistication going on. It's pretty roomy interior, so if you are installing anything in the front for radiators, there's plenty of space until you hit the ATX area. But of course, if you're not installing anything in the front, then that whole section looks kind of empty. As for the power supply shroud, we have 3 SSD locations, and I actually appreciate Cooler Master's approach to completely toolless design here. So you insert these rubber pegs into these holes and mount these little excerpts, I guess, from the SSD or 3.5-inch drives, and you simply put the SSD into the rubber peg. Very simple to install, and you can maneuver your drives all around the enclosure. So there's 2 spaces at the back, 3 on the power supply shroud, but we also have this individual drive cage for 3.5-inch units that you install with these individual caddies. The good thing is it does not interfere with any potential radiator that you might slide. However, it is riveted, so it is non-removable, which may cause issues with your power supply. So if your power supply is anything longer than 160 millimeters, then you will not be able to fit the power supply and your cables. And I'm guessing it's riveted so it can provide structural rigidity to the frame itself, but it is a big limitation for longer power supply units, and especially if you're not using any 3.5-inch drives, then that whole space is completely unutilized and you cannot even stash any cables into it because it completely blocks whatever is in front of the power supply. All right, I think it's time for the build sequence.
I'm kidding, this isn't slow motion.
And so outside of that hiccup with the power supply mounting because of the extension on the frame, I don't know why they can just simply cut it out so you could simply slide the power supply in without needing to jam it in. The assembly procedure was pretty straightforward, kind of what I would expect from a $69 case, but yeah, no real issues over here. And as for temperatures, compared to my most 3 recent case reviews, the CPU temperature is pretty on par versus like the P600S, so that's a good thing. But the GPU gets a little bit toasty, and I'm guessing it's because the front fan, while it is right in the center there, delivering more of that fresh air for the GPU, I guess it doesn't deliver as much air as the other cases. As for system noise levels, the side and front profiles are actually pretty identical, and it is slightly quieter on the side versus like the Fantex P600S, for example, which is a good thing. But from the front, it is slightly louder because, of course, that whole mesh thing is open, and because the fan is right against the mesh, it does create a little bit more turbulent noise profile. But otherwise, it's a pretty quiet case with full RPM, as you can hear. It is going right now, and yeah, it's pretty good. And so in conclusion, I feel like the NR600 is very much needed case for the $69 price point because they need to compete with the likes of Fantex and NZXT. And I would say the H500 would be like my favorite in terms of build quality because this one feels a little cheap in the front plastic panel, and all that steel here is quite thin, and when you're working with it, it does feel kind of cheap. But in terms of like the airflow perspective and noise profile, it is pretty decent. The P350X from Fantex does give you a little bit more visual candy with that light bar on the side and the front, while here you could spice things up because of the front mesh, and the interior is totally visible from the front. And of course, because of the tempered glass side panel, you could experiment with some interior lighting so that it would be visible on the exterior as well. And so I'm not disappointed, but I was hoping for a little bit more just so that it could bring it above the competition, because right now, as it stands, it doesn't really do anything different or better versus the rest of the cases. But at least it is not an airflow hazard, and that makes me happy. Alright guys, let me know what you think of the NR600 in the comments below. If you recall the original N600 with that whole side fan profile, I wish they could revive that and just modify the frame to meet the modern expectations, but instead we have this. I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.